All right, we are going to start talking about how do we graph quadratic functions, all right? And so we're breaking this up into 2 days. And today what we are going to focus on is just graphing them and not necessarily interpreting them and looking at why we're graphing them, but just looking at how do we graph these things. And so we're going to have a specific process. Here's our learning target right here, right? I can graph quadratic functions. And then we have our 2 things that we're going to talk about. So our quadratic functions and parabolas and graphing quadratic functions. All right. So let's jump in. Okay. So a quadratic function is another name for a function where the highest exponent you see is a 2, right? So you would, if you're following along with the student notes, you would put a 2 there. So we often use the term squared for that. And the reason we use that is because when you have a square, right, you have 2 sides, and let's say the side of a square is 3, it's 3, so you go 3 times 3, which is also 3 to the 2nd power. So somewhere along the line, somebody figured out, well, that's kind of like a square, so they called it squared, right? And so that's a term we'll use. And so the other thing we're going to be doing a lot with this is we are going to be looking at categorizing these coefficients that are in front. So we've got a coefficient in front of your x squared term. You've got a coefficient in front of your c term, my bad. And then you have a number that is a constant that is off by itself. And so we're going to be using that notation moving forward for a lot of things. So we kind of need to know what it means when we're talking about that, all right? So now we're going to talk a little vocab here, all right? So we've got, first of all, if we're talking about quadratics, they graph something that looks kind of like a bell-shaped curve or just a, I don't know what you'd call that, but looks kind of like a valley, right? And the name for that is a parabola. All right, and now the parabola has a couple of really interesting features to it. The first really important and interesting feature is parabolas are symmetric. They are the same on one side as the other. So you can take a parabola and you can fold it on itself. And if you fold it along this thing called the axis of symmetry, then you will have the exact same thing on one side as the other. So it's a reflection of itself, right? And so if we're going to use this to help us find features of this so that these are easier to graph. All right. Now, something that is on the axis of symmetry that's really important is this vertex. And the vertex is, we call it the extreme point of a parabola. So that basically means it's either the highest or the lowest point of a parabola. Right? Parabolas are not like linear equations where they kind of like x and y goes on forever. It's for these, usually your y is limited, okay? So when we talk about the extreme point of a parabola, you're going to go to the bottom or the top of that valley, depending on whether this thing is opening up like this, or you might have a parabola that kind of looks like this and sort of opens down, right? In which case, it would be right there, right? So this is your vertex in this case, and that is your lowest point. Okay, now what's great about the vertex is because the vertex is on the axis of symmetry, I can use the axis of symmetry. If I can figure that out, I can use that to find the vertex, and then that's a great spot to start graphing these things, because if I know this point and I can plot a couple of points here and here, I can just reflect them, right, over my axis of symmetry, and then know that I'm going to have the same thing on both sides. All right, so that's really, really, really huge for graphing these, and I can't emphasize the importance enough of this. All right, so that's our vocabulary that we're going to need to do these. All right, and just make sure that as you're going through the rest of the videos that you're really solid on this. And if I say parabola or vertex or axis of symmetry, I might call it a line of symmetry. Just make sure you understand what I'm talking about, right? And so you can reference this video for that. Okay, so I am going to stop this video and we are going to move on to the next slide.